The rain that day came down in sheets, soaking the cracked sidewalk outside my Buckman apartment. I remember the sound of her heels on the wet concrete, quick and restless, as if even the weather couldn't slow her down. Livia held Avi on one hip, Tam in the crook of her arm, their cries muffled against the folds of her blazer. She barely looked at me when she set them down inside, their little coats damp, cheeks flushed from the cold. "I'll be back in an hour, Mom," she said, brushing stray strands of hair from her face. Her eyes darted to her phone, then to the street. Before I could ask where she was going, the door had already shut, the echo of her promise lingering longer than she did. I made warm bottles with shaking hands, propped both girls against my knees, and whispered nonsense lullabies to calm them. I told myself it was temporary, an hour, maybe 2. I placed them in the crib I had kept from Livia's own infancy, its paint chipped but sturdy, and sat in the armchair listening for footsteps in the hallway. Night fell. The hallway stayed quiet. The first week blurred into fevers and late-night phone calls to the pediatrician. I remember holding Avi against my chest in the emergency room at Oregon Health and Science University, praying her breathing would steady. Tam cried herself hoarse in the carrier slung over my shoulder. I watched the double doors, waiting for Livia to come rushing through. Guilt on her face, explanations tumbling out, but only nurses came, handing me forms to sign, calling me guardian as if that word could be borrowed. Weeks became months. I returned books at the library where I worked, then raced home for bedtime. I patched together babysitters when shifts overlapped, kept records in neat folders, immunizations, school papers, every scrap of proof that I was the one standing in. I stopped telling neighbors Livia might come back, eventually. I stopped telling myself. The hour she promised stretched thin, then snapped altogether. What replaced it was a rhythm of mornings filled with cereal bowls and backpacks, nights with cocoa and whispered stories while the rain tapped the window. Somewhere in that stretch of years, they began to reach for me, not as grandma, but simply as the person who was always there. And though I never stopped glancing at the door, I knew the next chapter of their lives would be written with my handwriting on every line. The apartment was never meant for 3 people, let alone 3 growing girls if I counted myself among them. 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen that doubled as dining room, and a living space that barely held our thrift store couch. Yet within those walls, Avi and Tam built a childhood that was both fragile and fierce. I woke before dawn most days, packing lunches, smoothing wrinkled dresses, and finding misplaced homework. At the library, I shelved books with aching feet, then rushed home to help with violin practice or a science project built from recycled boxes. Dinner was often simple spaghetti or bean stew, but it was eaten together. The 3 of us tucked close around a second-hand table that wobbled when Tam leaned too hard on it. Avi grew into orderliness, the kind of child who lined up her pencils by size and color, who asked for extra time to practice scales until her fingers trembled. Tam, younger but louder, had a way of cutting straight to the truth. At 7, she once told a teacher that she didn't need to be reminded about real parents because she already had one who showed up. I learned then how deep her instinct to defend ran. Through all those years, I became the custodian of proof. Every report card slipped into a plastic sleeve, every doctor's note filed by date. I knew someday I might need to show not only that I had loved them, but that I had been legally present in every way I could manage. Only once did I cross a line I couldn't erase. Avi had strep throat, fever raging past midnight, and the clinic refused antibiotics without a parent's signature. I signed Livia's name with a hand that shook, hating myself even as I pressed the pen to paper. I told no one. The pills worked. Avi slept peacefully by morning. but the guilt never left. Still, when the girls curled against me on stormy nights, Tam clutching my arm and Avi murmuring about her next recital, I knew that presence mattered more than perfection, and it was presence that would be tested the day Livia finally returned. 20 years had passed since that rainy afternoon, yet the sound of Livia's heels still echoed in my memory when I saw her again. It was not at my door, but across the courtroom. She wore a cream suit. Her hair swept into a style meant to speak of control, of success. Her attorney stood beside her, sharp-voiced and rehearsed, declaring that she had been denied access to her daughters, that she had come to reclaim them, that I had committed kidnapping. The word lodged in my chest like rusted iron. Behind me, I felt Avi's hand press gently against my shoulder. Tam shifted in her seat, her jaw set, eyes narrowed at the woman who had left us behind. They were nearly grown now, Avi in her second year at university, Tam in her last year of high school. Yet in that moment they looked younger, uncertainty creeping across their faces. Judge Mara Klein presided with an expression that betrayed no allegiance. Her silver hair framed a face lined with years of listening to arguments sharpened by desperation. She asked for evidence, her voice measured, as though she'd seen every shade of betrayal before and knew that truth was never as simple as opening statements. I rose slowly, steadying my knees against the wooden bench. The years of sacrifice seemed to press against my back like a weight, yet I straightened, unwilling to let my daughter's accusations define the story we had lived. I did not speak of hospital vigils or violin lessons, of winter mornings scraping frost from the car while 2 little girls dozed in the back seat. Not yet. Instead, I promised the court I had something more than words. My voice came out steadier than I expected, each syllable carrying the quiet resolve of 2 decades. The judge nodded once, inviting me to continue at the next session. I returned to my seat, Avi's hand still resting on my shoulder, Tam leaning close enough that I could feel her defiance burning. The past was no longer memory. It had become evidence waiting to be opened, and the proof sat sealed inside a worn manila envelope. When the judge called me forward again, the courtroom seemed to grow smaller, the air tighter. I carried the envelope in both hands, its corners worn soft from years of being shuffled between drawers and satchels. To anyone else, it might have looked like nothing more than a bundle of paper. To me, it was 2 decades of nights and mornings, of small victories and hidden fears. I placed it on the bench before Judge Klein. My palms lingered a moment longer than necessary. She studied me, then slid the flap open and drew out the first sheet. The opening photograph was of Avi on her first day of kindergarten, standing in front of the apartment door, her lunchbox nearly as big as her torso. I had written her name and my phone number on the back, just in case. The judge tilted the image toward the light, then set it aside with care. Next came Tam's emergency room discharge form. My signature scrawled at the bottom where the box marked guardian appeared. A medical record, permission slips, field trip waivers, each document bore my handwriting. I could see Livia stiffen across the room, her lawyer's confident mask flickering as page after page told a story they hadn't prepared to fight. Report cards followed, each preserved in plastic sleeves, notes from teachers thanking me for attending conferences, photographs of birthday parties celebrated in our tiny kitchen, cakes baked from scratch when money was thin, Avi's ribbon from her first recital, Tam's certificate for a math competition. The pile grew on the judge's desk. A paper tower of years lived without their mother present. Judge Klein lifted her gaze toward Livia. "Your name does not appear here," she said evenly. "Not on a single form." Livia's lips parted, but no words followed. She shifted in her chair, adjusting her suit jacket, As if fabric could cover the absence of 20 years, I remained silent, watching Avi and Tam out of the corner of my eye. Avi's shoulders had relaxed slightly, relief mixing with sorrow. Tam sat forward, her arms folded tight, as if daring her mother to explain away the evidence. The judge set the final document down with deliberate care. The silence in the room was louder than any gavel, and in that silence, the truth of why Livia had returned began to surface, shimmering beneath the weight of paper and memory. The following morning, the courtroom was quieter, as though everyone had absorbed the blow of the envelope. Judge Klein shuffled her notes, then asked Livia's attorney if there was anything further to present. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and produced a stack of documents that looked far more polished than my worn files. He began to speak of provisions made long ago by the girl's late father policies, he said, that were meant to ensure his daughter's futures. The words felt rehearsed, carefully chosen to reframe neglect as foresight. He explained that a modest life insurance payout and a small trust fund had been set aside, with the stipulation that any guardian would oversee it until the girls reached adulthood. The courtroom murmured softly. My pulse thudded in my ears. I had known about the insurance policy in broad strokes, but I had never been given the details. When Avi turned 20 earlier that spring, she had received a letter from the insurer, one I'd helped her decipher at our kitchen table. The policy was real, and the sums, while not extravagant, were enough to matter. Tuition could be covered, living costs managed, a foundation for their adult lives. Tam, only 2 years younger, would receive her share upon reaching 18. The attorney emphasized the timing, his voice rising as he said the words fiduciary responsibility. He claimed that my long-standing guardianship was never formally sanctioned, that Livia, as the biological mother, was entitled to reassume control of those funds. I caught Avi's eyes from where she sat behind me, her brows knit, not in surprise, but in recognition of what she already suspected. Tam's arms were crossed, her foot tapping against the bench, impatience radiating from her. It struck me then how perfectly aligned the lawsuit was with the looming release of the trust. Livia had not appeared for birthdays, for graduations, for funerals, but she had materialized just months before Tam's 18th birthday. The arithmetic was too precise to ignore. When the attorney finished, Judge Klein leaned back, her expression unreadable. "So it seems," she said slowly, "that this court must consider not only custody, but financial interest." Her eyes shifted to me. "Mrs. Caro, do you understand the implications of this claim?" "Yes, Your Honor," I answered. Though my voice carried the weight of 20 years, I understood perfectly. This was not about reunion or love. It was about numbers printed on bank statements. Numbers my daughter believed were worth rewriting history for. The judge nodded once, then called for a recess. I turned to my granddaughters, ready to speak aloud the truths I had kept tucked away too long. That night, after the courthouse emptied and the echo of gavel strikes faded from my ears, I sat with Avi and Tam at our kitchen table. The envelope still lay in the center, its contents half-sorted, pages spilling like a life too heavy to contain. I wanted to reassure them, to tell them that everything would be all right. But the truth pressed against me until silence became impossible. "I need to tell you both something," I began, my voice catching. "Not about your mother this time, about me." They looked at me with the same patience they had since childhood, though I could see the strain behind their eyes. Avi folded her hands, waiting. Tam leaned back, suspicion flickering across her face. "When you were little, I failed Livia before I failed you. She called me when she was drowning, and I told her to be stronger. I thought motherhood demanded sacrifice, that she simply needed to tough it out. I didn't see the depth of her collapse, and by the time I understood, She was already gone. The silence that followed was different from courtroom silence. This one was personal. Sharp. Avi blinked rapidly, her jaw tightening. Tam's fingers drummed against the table before going still. I took a breath. There's more. Once, when Avi had a fever so high I thought I'd lose her, the clinic refused to release medication without a parent's signature. I signed your mother's name. I told myself it was necessary. And it was. But I crossed a line. I carried that choice ever since. Tam was the first to speak. You kept us alive. That's not failure. Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying how deeply she felt the weight of it. Avi reached for my hand. You should have told us sooner, but you did what you had to do. You've always done what you had to do. I squeezed her hand. Relief and sorrow tangled in my chest. The truth hadn't shattered us. It had only laid bare the fractures already there. We were still sitting together, still holding on, and we would need that strength for the confrontation that was yet to come. I arrived early, choosing a corner table where I could see the door. The hum of conversation and the clatter of cups did little to calm the weight in my chest. When Livia finally walked in, she carried herself as though the years had been kind. Her coat tailored, her smile deliberate. She greeted me with a practiced warmth, as if 20 years could be folded into a polite hello. I didn't return the smile. Instead, I laid a folder on the table between us. Before we talk about the girls, we need to talk about you. Her eyes flicked to the folder, then back to me. Mom, is this really necessary? She asked. Her tone soft, coaxing. I opened it anyway, sliding out the first set of documents, bankruptcy filings from Seattle. Stamped and dated. Necessary, I said quietly. These show you're insolvent? Her expression faltered, though she quickly smoothed it over. I laid down the next set, a marriage certificate. Her name paired with a man I'd never met. You've been married for 3 years. You hid that in court. Color rose in her cheeks. That has nothing to do with custody. It has everything to do with credibility, I countered. The last set of papers bore headlines and court filings. Her husband's name connected to federal investigations, wire fraud, money laundering. The cafe around us carried on orders called out. Milk steamed, while at our table silence fell heavy. Livia's mask cracked. She tried laughter first, dismissive. Then came tears, sudden and theatrical, pooling against carefully applied mascara. Finally, her voice sharpened into threat. You think you can ruin me? I leaned forward, my voice steady. Withdraw the petition. Leave the girls to finish becoming women without your interference. Or I will make sure every word of this reaches the court, and you'll lose more than custody. For the first time since she sat down, she had no ready reply. She gathered her bag with trembling hands and left without another word. I closed the folder, knowing the real test would come not in private, but back in the courtroom, when the girls themselves were asked to speak. The courtroom felt different when we returned. The air was taut, as if everyone knew the next word spoken would matter more than any argument made so far. Judge Klein adjusted her glasses, her gaze steady on Avi and Tam. I want to hear from you, she said. Not lawyers, not guardians. You. Avi glanced at me before rising. Her voice was calm but strained, each word chosen with care. I don't really know my mother. But I also don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if there's something worth salvaging. I'm willing to try, but only if it's supervised. A short visit. No promises beyond that. Tam stood immediately after, her posture rigid. I disagree. She's had 20 years to try. We don't need experiments now. But if Avi wants a chance, I'll go along as long as there are strict limits and Grandma is the one in charge. The judge listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned forward, her voice firm but not unkind. Very well. I'm setting conditions. Limited, supervised visitation. No financial entanglements. Any violation, and the arrangement ends immediately. Do you both understand? Avi nodded, her eyes downcast. Tam gave a single curt shake of her head before adding, I understand the rules. I just don't believe they'll matter to her. Judge Klein struck her gavel softly, signaling the decision was entered. Papers rustled, attorneys whispered, but all I could hear was the thud of my own heart. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. My granddaughters would be the ones to carry the next step forward, and that step was about to collide with the crumbling facade Livia could no longer hold together. It did not take long for the cracks to show. News spread from Seattle that Livia's husband had been indicted on federal charges: fraud, laundering, schemes far beyond anything an Oregon courtroom could hide. Her name was dragged into the reports, not as a bystander, but as someone tied to the same collapsing house of cards. By the time we returned for the next hearing, she no longer arrived polished and poised. She was escorted in, her wrists bare of jewelry, her eyes red with fatigue. Her lawyer handed the judge a hurried request for continuance, citing personal circumstances. Later, through her attorney, Livia sent me an offer if I would fund her legal defense. She would withdraw the custody petition and leave the girls in peace. It was written in cold legal language, but I could almost hear her voice beneath it, still bargaining, still trying to turn motherhood into currency. I showed the letter to Avi and Tam at our kitchen table. Avi read it twice, her face pale, then shook her head. She doesn't want us, Grandma. She just wants rescue. Tam didn't even finish reading. She pushed the page back toward me. We're not for sale. And neither are you. When court reconvened, Judge Klein reviewed the record. The evidence was unshaken, the girl's testimony clear, and Livia absent of credibility. The gavel fell with finality. My guardianship recognized not only by practice but by law. The years of sacrifice etched into official record at last. I held the order in my hands, the seal pressed into heavy paper, and felt a weight lift that I had carried for 2 decades. Yet even as relief settled over me, I knew the journey wasn't finished. The girls had a future to claim, and together, they were about to take the next step. Months later, the rhythm of our lives had shifted. Avi stood on stage at her scholarship recital, bow drawn with steady hands, the hall filled with notes that shimmered like proof of everything she had worked for. Tam, meanwhile, thrived at her internship downtown, her sharp mind finding patterns in code the way she once found flaws in arguments. Watching them step into their futures, I felt the ground under us finally steady. One evening, they asked me to meet them in Montevilla. I assumed it was dinner, maybe a small celebration. Instead, they led me up the steps of a craftsman house with wide windows and a garden patch waiting to be filled. Tam pressed keys into my palm, her grin tight with nerves. It's ours, she said. But it's for you. We pooled the trust money. You deserve more than an apartment that never fit us. I traced the outline of the keys. Overwhelmed, Avi added softly. We've filed the papers too. Our name is Caro now. It always has been in every way that matters. That night, as I stood in the new yard, I received a text from Livia. A short apology. Nothing more. I stared at the screen for a long while before setting the phone down, without replying. Some doors didn't need to be reopened. Instead, I walked barefoot into the soil of the garden, already imagining rows of tomatoes and lavender. The earth was cool and forgiving. And for the first time in years, I felt rooted exactly where I belonged.